Welcome everybody to the SharePoint Community Call. This is July 2020 edition. It is July 14th, 2020, and my name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm going to be your host today, so it's going to be me for first 15 minutes, and then we have the real stars of the day, which are Sesha, Mani, and Nikita. I'm going to talk about the Microsoft 365 information barriers. Now, we're going to start with a quick recap on what has happened with the SharePoint extensibility and development. So latest news, monthly summary, and other details, what's happening there. We're going to go through the typical acknowledgement of our community contributors from the past month. And then we have the real stars of today, who are Nikita and Sesha, who are going to talk about the Microsoft 365 information barrier. So first of all, this is one of the community calls, which is around SharePoint. And in this community calls, we also talk about the Microsoft 365 PnP and also contributions across, not just to SharePoint, but also on the Teams and Craft areas. So acknowledging the people. But we do have quite a lot of other different community calls, and these are being presented by multiple different people. So if you're interested in, for example, there's a community call for the adaptive craft specific monthly community call, Microsoft Teams specific monthly community call, and all of that. And you can absolutely choose which of these calls you want to join. All of them are getting recorded, and all of them are available then from the YouTube channel, typically like 24 hours after the recording. Now, the SharePoint one, the SharePoint monthly one, is getting more and more kind of adjusted, not just to be about extensibility, but also about features and capabilities, because I think there's a massive demand for people to understand just the basics, like multilingual portals or information barriers like today. So we're kind of taking over the SharePoint monthly one for those January things, and then we still have the Microsoft 365 Developers Special Interest Group happening bi-weekly, SharePoint Framework happening bi-weekly for SharePoint side as well, and obviously all of the other stuff. Now, if you think about, or if you're wondering on what were the YouTube channels where all of these calls are currently recorded, we do have actually two of them, which might be slightly confusing. The one is the Microsoft 365 developer videos, where we have developer-oriented videos, but then some of the developer-oriented videos are actually in our community video channel. So we do have two. We know that this is slightly confusing, but some of the videos which we have on the community video channel would not be just about development and extensibility. So we're kind of trying to figure out how we make this happen in the future. Right now, we have actually a really nice set of new videos in the Microsoft 365 and SharePoint Community YouTube channel, where we have Jeff Deeper and multiple leaders from our engineering side talking about the future of the Microsoft 365 collaboration. So please go and check them out. We have a lot of open source assets available from the GitHub. So GitHub SharePoint, GitHub PnP, GitHub Office Dev are the most typical ones where you can find the information. And also github.com/Microsoft Craft. How did I miss that one? Let's add that one there as well. We have multiple sample galleries which we're improving all the time. You can easily access Microsoft Teams samples from the GitHub or in the internet. So having a one location where you can find them. And if you're wondering on what are all of these assets and things, and why do I need to remember so many URLs? This is too difficult. It's not. There's only one URL to remember, which is AKMS M365 PnP, and from there you can get access on all of the different YouTube channels and Microsoft Craft documentation, Microsoft Teams extensibility, SharePoint extensibility, and so on. So we want to have a one location where we can easily access on all of our open source and non-open source assets. One of the trainings, I actually kind of teased about this one already. One of the news stuff which you want to be aware is that there's a new set of 14 different videos which is basically an on-demand training sessions for SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams, and Yammer, and Stream. And this is available from the community YouTube channel. So the Microsoft 365 PnP YouTube channel. We basically have Jeff Deeper, Omar Sahin, multiple Microsoft Teams leaders presenting in this course and telling what's actually happening. Also, extensibility is being covered in some of the calls as well, if you are more on the development side of the house. Now, one of the big news within the last month, just to recap those as well, was the release of a .NET standard version of the SharePoint CSOM API. Now, let me be super clear. Always use Microsoft Graph when possible, but if you hit a gap in the Microsoft Graph, which we have not yet addressed, then you can actually use the CSOM API to fall back. And really, this is going to help you then to build Microsoft .NET Framework 3.x version or .NET Framework 5 versions of your solution. So you can really take advantage of the latest technologies when you are implementing stuff in SharePoint Online. But again, please use Microsoft Graph where possible, and fall back on CSOM where needed. On the SharePoint development side of the house, SharePoint Framework is actually planned to 1.11 is planned to get released this week, and this will enable SharePoint Framework support in the store, so in the AppSource or in the classic SharePoint store. So this is currently planned to happen this week. Now there might be still last-minute delays on that one if we found any last-minute things which we need to still polish. So I'm not going to promise, I'm not going to put my head on the fact that we're shipping this on this week, but hopefully that will happen. That will also include some Teams integration options for SharePoint Framework, so it will make the development with SharePoint Framework towards Microsoft Teams even better, because SharePoint Framework gives you the capability, as an example, not require, being auto-hosted, that extensibility. There's going to be improved Microsoft Graph APIs, more branding settings in portals, better Microsoft Teams embedded support in general, and then there are other elements as well. Now, I'm being conscious about the time. If we have a look quickly on the SharePoint development UserVoice, in this community call, we've been concentrating having only to talk about the UserVoice entries for SharePoint extensibility. Maybe we should actually talk about the other UserVoice entries here in the future. The number one request which we used to have was to see some .NET standard version. That has been now shipped for the SharePoint Online, and currently the most requested capability is to be able to have editing experiences in the SharePoint Framework. The ones which we have arrows on the list will be actually shipped relatively soon. So Microsoft Graph APIs for content types and taxonomy will be shipping by end of this month is currently the estimate. So by end of July, there is unfortunately some delays on that one based on our previously communicated agenda. And then the add support for SharePoint Framework solutions packages in AppSource Store will be shipping hopefully later this week or maybe then next week. And that, by the way, will enable also SharePoint Framework solutions to be used in the Microsoft Teams, even though they're coming from the store, which is pretty cool. Now, quick update also in our open source and community work. If you're interested in getting engaged, if you want to actually contribute on the documentations, maybe in the Microsoft 365 community docs or in the extensibility docs or in the other docs, we have actually training available for you. So if you're interested in contributing, but you are afraid of actually not really understanding what is a GitHub and how all of this work, what is this edit, what is a pull, what is a request, and how does this thing work, we actually have hands-on training available. So David Warner and Hugo Bernier are setting up these sessions, and there are multiple other people helping behind the scenes as well. And these have been actually really popular. So we're getting up to 20 to 25 people attending on the sessions, which is really great, because then multiple people learn how to contribute in the open source as well. So the next ones, the first time contributor session is in July 24th and 27th, and community doc sessions on July 31st and August 3rd. AKMS sharing is caring is the address for that one. So thank you, David and Hugo, for this awesome initiative. Now, one of the things which we're getting a lot of feedback all the time is how do I get up to date on what's actually happening, all of the news, all of the things. I would like to actually listen a podcast, or I would like to have a video feed what's actually happening. So we have a PnP Weekly where we actually cover all of the latest news from the Microsoft and also from the community. So we're selecting some of the community articles which have been interesting within the past week, not only about the extensibility and development, but also in other areas where we could talk about in the PnP Weekly episodes. And these are like 45 to 50 minutes typically. There are certain exceptions on that one as well, where me and Waldek Mastercards from Rencor typically have a visitor, and we talk about Microsoft 365 and what does it mean for the community, what does it mean for partner, what is the partner ecosystem opportunities there, what does it mean for end users, and so on. So interesting discussions if you're interested. July 2020 update, and the monthly update where we write and acknowledge all of our monthly contributors went live like 20 minutes ago. So it is available now in our blog, so you can actually find it easily from there. Basically, it covers all of the different news and articles, videos, samples, and contributions which have happened within the past month. Interesting enough, writing this blog post is it's taking more and more time every single month, because there's more and more people actually getting involved, which is awesome. It's a positive problem. It also takes quite a lot of time to actually do that. If you open up and have a look on that, you'll understand how much information is in that blog post. Now, this is the list of contributors within the last month. So basically from this day, 1 month before we wrote the previous monthly release. And so these are all of the people who've been involved in our open source community efforts, either contributing in documentation, samples, or doing a live demo in the community calls, and the number of people is growing all the time. So thank you everybody for showing an interest, helping each other, because obviously sharing is caring. We want to help each other be successful even in these tough times. So thank you everybody for being helpful and helping others in the community. From a company side of the house, this is the full list of companies who we have the permissions to show their logo in this monthly community call. And from these companies, the people which were mentioned in the previous slide are working for us. So basically, thank you for these companies as well, because they allow their employees then contribute in an open source initiatives driven by or led by Microsoft and our MVP community people. And from Microsoft side, the list is growing as well. So there's more and more people from the Microsoft side getting involved in our open source efforts, which is great. So thank you for you as well. Let's not forget about the Microsoft internal community members who are spending their own time on contributing for your benefit. But that's the really fast 13-14 minutes, which I'm always taking on the monthly community call start, just to give you an update on what's happening. And today's real talent is Nikita and Sesha, and which Sesha, I think you will be starting unless I'm completely mistaken.
No, that's correct, Vesa. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for the opportunity, Vesa, on this particular call for us to share Microsoft 365 information barriers in SharePoint and OneDrive. I think many of you might already know me. I'm Sesha Mani. I'm a principal group program manager in the SharePoint and OneDrive team. Been with the team since 2011, almost 9 years now, and very well versed with the product. And my team drives all the investments in our security and compliance area all up. And I have here with me today Nikita Bandyopadhyay, and she is a program manager in my team and specifically focusing on this particular information barrier feature. So let's actually get started. The agenda that we were thinking to share with you is to share the top level industry trends, what we are seeing in the security and compliance space, and then what is the information barrier scenario. Some of you might be already familiar with this, and we would like to give you set the stage for what is the scenario indeed. And then more importantly, how the information barrier interplays within SharePoint, OneDrive, and also Teams experiences as well. And we will walk you through the quick demo and also share with you how you can take advantage of these features and what's next there. And definitely we'll make sure there is a Q&A session at the end as well. So let's get started on the industry trends. The first and foremost thing I would say here is the exponential growth that we are seeing in the digital data. So gone are the days where you really have physical information, your corporate information in the physical format, but now everything is being digitized. Every industry is becoming a software technology company. And what it means is in any industries, companies, the data is actually only going to grow. And not only the data aspects, the notion of both internal employees and external partners having able to access this corporate data from anywhere, from any devices, and also from at any point of time. So that aspect is also growing as well. The expectation of your employees, the expectation of your external partners is increasing, and they want to be able to access your corporate data no matter where they are, no matter what kind of devices they are using. And as you can see, even in the future, their virtual assistants, they want to be able to access the corporate data on their behalf as well. While this is all goodness in the context of digital data, there is also a notion of hackers being able to get to your data as well. And that's where the security controls that we offer in our services is playing a very important critical role. The other key industry trend that we are seeing is increasing the regulatory needs. Compliance and regulations are definitely increasing in this digital world, especially as more and more data is becoming digitized. and it is exponentially growing, the regulators are watching very carefully and ensuring that the governance is put in place. It actually happens across all the different verticals. And for example, if you just take one example vertical, which is finance companies, there is a compliance called FINRA, and this authority has enforced that FinServ customers being able to showcase that they can stop insider trading within the company. What it means is, so imagine you have investment banking department and advisory department inside a finance company, it's a FinServ company. Now, because of the nature of these two departments, it's quite possible that investment bankers who work with normally individuals like you and me, helping us to choose right stocks to trade and things like that, they might have some additional, potentially some information they may get from the corporate advisors, which are typically the users that are working with corporates, such as Microsoft, LinkedIn, and so on. So they have much more higher information. Like Microsoft is about to acquire, let's say, LinkedIn. So if that kind of information is getting leaked over to the investment banking department users, then investment bankers could use that for helping their clients to get it. This is what they mean by insider trading. It's a conflict of interest in their job duties that they do in their organization. So FINRA and through the SEC has required that customers, especially the FinServ customers, need to be able to showcase to SEC that they have controls in place to block the communication and collaboration between these two departments. And I want to be super clear, this isn't one example in one particular vertical, but I'm pretty sure many of you are already having this kind of requirement in your own industries as well, be it energy industry or healthcare industry, where the HIPAA compliance is super critical. And also many other, like government agencies is the other one too. So we do see this increasing need for controlling internal collaboration and sharing just because of the nature of the job or the role that the individual is playing in your organization. So that's really the industry trend that we are seeing. And also this particular FINRA compliance related needs is being there, and folks have developed on-premises solutions for these kind of needs as well. Whereas in M365, we do want to help you by providing out-of-the-box native functionality there. So let me actually give you a quick view of building it down to Microsoft 365. So imagine that in an organization like Contoso Bank Corporation, investment banking department has their own teams and SharePoint sites that they manage and they work with. And let's say there are 1,000 users in that investment banking department. And then you have corporate advisor department. Let's say there are 500 users in that department, and they have their own teams experiences. They create their own teams, create their own SharePoint sites, as well as they have their own personal OneDrives in the organization as well. And as I said, there is investment bankers, and then there are advisors. But then also, more importantly, you have the rest of the employees in your organization. So really, if you think about this, there are actually three segments here. One is investment bankers, then advisors. Then the third one is the yellow color in this picture is all the rest of the employees in your organization. Really, the requirement is investment banker should be able to access their investment banking related information. The advisors should be able to access their advisor related information. But then more importantly, only they should be able to access it. Investment banking resources should not be accessible by advisory department users or even the rest of the employees in your organization. That's why the conditional access information barrier must match in order to access a content, a SharePoint site or a OneDrive content has to be there. And I want to take a minute to call this particular out. This is really the crux of this whole feature, which is all of you know already there is a SharePoint permissions model, which is you can share a file or a site with a person, and now that person has access to the site and a file. Now we have actually added an additional authorization layer on top of that. It's not enough to have authorization permissions just for the site and a file. You must also match the conditional access for information barrier segments as well. That means if a given SharePoint site, if it is tagged as investment banker's site, then you must be one of the investment bankers to access that particular site, no matter whether you have permissions already given to the site through some other means or not. So in a way, it's a two-layer authorization is what we have introduced. And this is a very, very powerful security permissions mechanism, because as you can imagine, no matter what your permission says in the given site or a file, the moment you flag a site as investment banker's specific site, then immediately it's the union of you must be an investment banker and you must have access to the SharePoint site in order to actually gain access to the content inside the site. So we believe this is really a transforming authorization and permissions model and will help many organizations that are in need of this insider trading related regulations. The second important aspect I would call out is if I am inside that investment banker site, who can I actually share the file with? So that is, we are actually taking the experience level as well. So if I am an investment banker, Sesha, and now I'm trying to share a file with, let's say, Nikita, and she happens to be an advisory user, or Vesa, who happens to be coming from the rest of the organization in my company, then I will be blocked from sharing that particular site or a file in the site, mainly because I am the investment banker and I'm also working in the context of the SharePoint site that is flagged as meant for investment bankers. So we actually have done, I would say, comprehensive analysis on which experiences also where we need to apply this investment information barrier policy as well. So I hope I gave you a 10,000 foot view on what is information barrier scenario and how in Microsoft 365 we are bringing this forward. To put it in a simple terms, you will be able to segment your users in your organization based on your compliance requirements. So for example, you can say these 1,000 users are investment bankers, these 500 users are corporate advisors, and then you have rest of the company. And the way you can segment them, and Nikita will walk you through in details in a minute, just based on your existing Azure Active Directory properties. So for example, location of the user or the department property of the user. So you can choose a specific SharePoint Azure Active Directory property or a security group, and then use that to segment the users. And then be very clear, this is the compliance segmentation that you are bringing. So it is very, very critical that it needs to be predictable. And that means a given user can become part of only one compliance segment at a time. Because from a compliance point of view, you need to be able to show to your officers that Sesha belongs to just investment bankers. That's his role. That's what he does in my organization. The second thing is you can associate a given SharePoint site to a specific segments because the resource also needs to be attached. And that's how we bring in the access, conditional access based on the resource association as well. Third one, segmenting users OneDrive is coming into play, because if investment banker as Sesha is investment banker, then even from his own OneDrive, right, is he allowed to share with the rest of the organizations or with corporate advisors? So we do believe we are bringing the IB policy enforcement to OneDrive as well. And I quickly walked you through the FINRA compliance requirement with the financial sector. So with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Nikita to walk us through a quick demo of this scenario. Over to you, Nikita.
Thank you, Sesha. Let me quickly share my screen. Thank you, Sesha. Now let's get into the details of how information barrier works for SharePoint and OneDrive. So like Sesha said, we are giving you the capability to set segments on a particular SharePoint site. The whole idea is if in your organization you have certain SharePoint sites that need to be protected with information barrier policies, we are allowing your SharePoint administrator to set segments on those sites. The sites in scope are modern sites as well as classic sites. Today, only the contents of the site are segment associated. All other group resources are currently not segment associated. Access, like Sesha said, we have done extensive work to ensure that the conditional access control honors the IB policy which is associated to the site, as well as the sharing control will be allowed only per the segments that are stamped on the site. Now let's see how all this takes care of. Now today with SharePoint information barriers, the SharePoint administrator can use the SharePoint PowerShell module to add segments to a site. On the screen you can see that we have extended our set SPO site commandlet and have added two new parameters, add information segment and remove information segment, using which the admins can now add all the compatible segments that they want to add to a site, as well as if they don't want to have a segment, they can remove it using the remove information segment commandlet. They can also check what are the segments which are associated on the site using PowerShell. This can be achieved using the get SPO site commandlet. Now also, we understand that as a site owner, you want to know what are the different properties which are stamped on a site. So as you can see here in the site information panel, the site owner would be able to view the segments which are associated on the site. The example that I have here is this is an advisory team site, and we have displayed the new property, which is information segment, and it clearly says it's corporate advisory. So what this means is the SharePoint administrator has set the segment corporate advisory explicitly on the site, and also the site owner now is made aware through the site information panel that the site is associated to corporate advisory. Now, once the site is segment associated, the site is protected by IB policy. So access for the site is only allowed to users whose segment belong to the same as that of the site and who also have site access permission. So in short, the user needs to meet both the conditions. One, the basic site access permission, as well as should have the same segment as that of the site. If either of these conditions are not met, the user will not be able to access the segment associated site. This is a typical access denied error page that the user will see if he is either not belonging to the same segment as that of the site which he is trying to access, or he does not have the site access permission. Some of you might think, hey, what happens if the user's segment changed? Now, if the user's segment changed, every time the user is trying to access a site, we will check at access time if the user belongs to the same segment as that of the site. So for example, if a user was belonging to investment banking information segment and was accessing a site, if few months later the user changes job and moves to corporate advisory, the user will now lose access to all the previous investment banking sites, because at access time, when we match the segment, the user no longer belongs to investment banking. He has actually moved to corporate advisory. So the main idea here is we always check at runtime to make sure that the right user is accessing a SharePoint site which is protected with information barriers. Also, sharing is another way of allowing users access to your site. So we have done extensive work to make sure that the site's sharing control is also protected with information barrier policy. So few things that we have done here. I'll start with the leftmost one. Most of you might be aware of anyone with link sharing option. This is a powerful tool which you can, once you share a site or a content with anyone with link, then the user does not need to sign in. They can automatically anonymously access the content. So for information barriers, we have made sure that anyone with link option is disabled because the site is protected with IB. The second thing that we have done is the centermost one, which is the site and its content can only be shared with the same segment users as that of the site. So in the example, you can see that this site is being shared with user Jeff, but cannot be shared with user Nikita because Nikita does not belong to the same segment as that of the site. So the whole idea is that the user will not be able to even discover somebody who's on the other side of the information barrier wall. And the third thing that we have done is that the new users can be added to the site only if their segment matches that of the site. So as you can clearly see, we have done work to ensure that the people picker experiences, whether you are sharing a site or bringing in new member, also honors IB policy to make sure that the right members whose segment matches that of the site get added to the site. Moving from SharePoint to OneDrive, as you have understood so far, that with information barriers, we are allowing the users or the admins to segment users, which means you are classifying your user as an investment banker user, for example, or a corporate advisor user. So it's basically the user also has an information segment. Now, if the user has an information segment, what we are doing is the user's OneDrive will automatically get associated with the user segment per their policy. So if a user belongs to investment banking, the user's OneDrive site will automatically get associated with investment banking, as well as other segments which are allowed to investment banking per policy. Also, we are allowing the SPO admin to manage the segment association on a OneDrive using the SPO PowerShell. So similarly, how an SPO admin can add segments or remove segments from a SharePoint site, we are also allowing them to manage it for the OneDrive sites. Now, once the OneDrive is associated with segments, the access control and sharing control will be allowed per the IB segments on the site. So it's similar to how the access control and sharing control will work for a typical SharePoint site. So out of the box, if the user has a segment associated, the user's OneDrive will also automatically be associated with the segment. As you know, OneDrive in SharePoint is also tightly coupled with Microsoft Teams. So if you have created a team using Microsoft Teams service, there is a Files tab, which is nothing but the SharePoint site, which is used as the document library for that particular team. Going forward, the Microsoft Teams Files experience and the SharePoint site associated to it will also be honored based on the policies of the members of that team. So the access will be granted based on the segments which are on that team, as well as the sharing control will be based on the segments which are on that particular team. With that, let me quickly give you a demo of how this all works. So here is M365 Security and Compliance Center. Like we mentioned earlier, information barriers is a unified policy across M365. So the compliance admin will have to go to your M365 Security and Compliance Center to define segments and the associated policy. Today, that can be achieved using SCC PowerShell module. Here I'm showing you a mock-up of how all this works through. So this is an example where the compliance admin has gone ahead and created two segments for this Contoso tenant. The segments are investment banking and advisory. Today, we allow you to use about 20 Azure Active Directory properties using which you can define information segments. Here is an example. The compliance admin has defined investment banking segment using the fields location, user principal name. You can use other fields like city, department, so on and so forth. So here is the definition of investment banking. Also, there is another segment defined, which is advisory. The attributes that have been picked are location and user principal name. Once the segments are defined, the next step is defining the policy. Typically, the customers define a block policy. The whole idea is you do not want your investment bankers to communicate and collaborate with advisory. So here you can see that I have set up a policy which says investment banking segment is not allowed to communicate and collaborate with advisory. When we talk about communication, it typically means through email and Teams, and collaboration means SharePoint and OneDrive for Business, so for all the shared resources. Now, once the policies have been defined, like I said, if the user is associated with their segment, then their OneDrive will automatically get associated with the user segment and any other segment that is allowed to the user segment per policy. So here is an example of user Sesha. If you remember from the mock-up, user Sesha belonged to investment banking segment. So here's Sesha's OneDrive for Business. This has automatically got associated with investment banking segment, same as Sesha's segment. Now, access to this particular OneDrive will be granted only to users whose segment matches that of the investment banking segment, which is on the OneDrive, as well as the sharing control will honor investment banking segment. So what does that mean? Is if user Sesha wants to share a particular file with, say, user Jeff, you remember user Jeff is an investment banker, he will be able to do so using the people picker. But if user Sesha tries to look up or even share the site or its content with user Nikita, he would not be able to do so because Nikita belonged to corporate advisory, and per investment banking policy, and per IB policy, investment banking is not allowed to communicate and collaborate with advisory. And because Nikita is an advisory, Sesha would not be even able to discover her, let alone be able to share the content with her through people picker. So this is how we make sure that the access is governed by the segments which are on the site, as well as the sharing is purely governed by the segments which are stamped on the site. Now switching gears to a SharePoint site. Here is a SharePoint site which is Australian banking site that was created. The SharePoint administrator has gone ahead and set segment investment banking on this particular site using PowerShell module. As the site owner now, I can go to the site information panel and see that the information segment of the site is investment banking. So this is how the site owner would know that, okay, my site is now protected with investment banking site or investment banking segment. And once a site is protected by segment, the access control and sharing control would be governed by the segments on the site. Again, if user is trying to share a content from this site with user Nikita, he would not be able to do so because Nikita does not belong to investment banking segment. So as you can see, we have made sure that if OneDrive is of a user who belongs to a segment, the OneDrive is protected with information banking, with information segment policies. And we are also giving the power to your SharePoint administrator to explicitly set segments on the site. Once the site is protected with segments, site's access control and sharing controls would be purely governed by the segments which are on the site. Now, you might think, okay, this is all good. What does this mean in terms of licensing? Can we get the M365 information barrier policy for any license or not? So this is a comprehensive compliance feature, and it would be available with all our E5 licenses. So if you have M365 E5 or Office 365 E5 or E5 compliance, then you would be able to have information barrier feature in your tenant. Also, the requirement is that the users that you are trying to protect with information segment or information barrier need to have E5 licenses. In short, if you have a need to protect your investment bankers and advisories in your tenant and you want to have a policy between them, you would need to define segments investment banking and advisory, and you need to make sure that all your investment banker users as well as all your advisory users need to have the E5 licenses. With that, I think we come to a conclusion of information barriers in SharePoint and OneDrive. Information barriers, as you might be aware, is already available for Teams. So using Teams, you can control users of investment banking is allowed or blocked to chat or call somebody from advisory or not. And now we are extending that capability to SharePoint and OneDrive as well. So with that, we are open for Q&A now. Thank you.
And thanks, Nikita, as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen where you can take the next step or the link where you can learn more about this feature. KDMS/SPO info barriers, that will give you a link to information about all SharePoint related information, and then /OneDrive info barriers is also available. And then there was a question about, is it GA, where is it preview, and so on. So this information barriers, as we discussed, as we showed you, is actually available as a general availability for June 20th. And there's a process you need in this documentation, we explained to you how do you nominate yourself if you wanted to get added in your tenant. Okay, so I'm going to go through the questions that got asked in the chat window as much as I can.
Just a quick note before Sesha started. I can see a few hands on the session, but let's use the chat in this time because there's more than 240 people in this call, so we can't really go to audio. It doesn't work like that well within this amount of people. So let's use the chat for questions if you don't mind. So Sesha, feel free.
Yes, thanks, Vesa. So users should be added on SharePoint group and AD group in order to get this working. No, the need here is the user needs to be in your Azure Active Directory, and either you can use a property on the user object, such as department property or location property and so on, to create these segments that Nikita was showing. Or you can use a security group that you have defined in Azure Active Directory to use that to define a segment. So it has to be some security principles in Azure Active Directory. And just to double click on that, there was a question about, can a dynamic security group in Azure Active Directory be used in order to define your segment? And the answer is yes. As long as it's a Azure Active Directory security group, doesn't matter whether it is a static or dynamic one, then you can use that for segment creation. Now, I do want to emphasize that these segments association are very strictly compliance and regulatory driven. So we expect that the numbers will be really low. And like we discussed, in a typical enterprise or companies, you have 10% or 15% of your employees that need to be in this regulatory mode, whereas the rest of the employees, you can continue to use the existing SharePoint permission model to secure the content. Go up. Is email communication blocked by Exchange? So the information barrier policy that you are creating, as Nikita showed, is actually you are creating it in the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center. And that, once it's created for communication in Teams, as well as in email communication, those will get honored. And then in the context of collaboration in SharePoint and OneDrive, these will get honored in that aspect as well. And there is more work we are planning to do for Exchange-specific information barriers, and stay tuned for more updates on that later this calendar year. So, can this be available for guest user accounts in your tenancy? As long as there is an user account in your Azure Active Directory, and you have the appropriate licenses assigned to them. In this case, this feature does require E5 to be assigned. If that guest user has to be in a segment, then it will work. Because from our point of view, that is like another user object in the Azure Active Directory. So, but it has to meet those requirements, which is the user account exists in Azure Active Directory and the appropriate license is associated with the license, with the user. When will this be made available? Will it be for Office 365 or just M365? I think this is for Office 365 services like SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and Exchange itself. It's the, I would say, the branding wise, we are all using now Microsoft 365. That's the reason why it is called as Microsoft 365 information barriers. Okay.
There is a question. Okay. The limit, what's the limit on how many segments can we create? So today you can create up to 100 segments in your tenant, but on a SharePoint site, you can set only up to 10 compatible segments on a site. So in a tenant, there can be up to 100 segments, but on a site collection, today you can set up to 10 segments only.
Perfect. There's another question. By default, what segment a user will be associated with? And the answer is no segments. By default, if you just create a user object in Azure Active Directory, no segments the user is associated with. So it's an explicit choice or action that the admin has to take in order to make a user part of a segment. And imagine you create a user object and you have a department code and you set that to investment bankers, and only then he becomes part of that investment bankers segment. But by default, if you do nothing, that user is not associated with any segments whatsoever. I think the search results, I already confirmed it, which is search results will be security trimmed based on this information barrier policy. Yes, if you changing a segment, and it will have impacts across your segmented sites and the corresponding search as well. So changing a segment of a user is a very big deal. Like as I said, typically when you change the role from investment bankers to corporate advisors, it's not a everyday kind of activity you do. It's maybe once in multiple years that you change the role in your organization. So that's a very typically seldom running activity. And what scope this IB policy is enforced to, as I explained, this is at the site collection scope. That's the level that you associate given information barrier. And that's where the information barrier policy is also enforced. Okay, I think I covered most of the questions. Will segments be defaulted for site memberships that get auto-created from project online site creation using PWA permissions? Not necessarily. Like segment association to a given site collection, be it whether it is created from project online or you are creating using a custom site provisioning script, you would have to take an explicit step to associate a segment to a site collection. Again, it's a compliance regulatory feature, so you need to be aware and be very thoughtful and mindful when you're actually associating to a site collection, associating an IB segment to a site collection. So that's why it's an explicit step. There's no automatic association happens whatsoever in the SharePoint sites. So you do have to take explicit step to associate an IB segment to a SharePoint site collection. Okay. There was a question about the difference between sensitivity labels and the information barrier policy. That's a really good question. Let me give a meta clarification there. So sensitivity labels, as you know, is meant for securing all your policies into a single label. Let's say creating a top secret label, and you can now associate different policies to it, like your privacy policy or unmanaged device policy and so on. Typically, that is meant for holistic security control of your organization and of your site collection. Whereas this info barrier that we just shared with you is primarily compliance and regulation oriented control. And this is also meant just by itself is a policy, and you can associate it to a site and to a given user. So it's a very predictable access mechanism that you can conform to your compliance auditors and so on. So that's how you should internalize these two models. Now, in the future, as we think further ahead in the future, would we look at bringing them together in some fashion or so? That's definitely, we are thinking about it, and we will see if there is a natural fit, then we will definitely try to look into it further. But for now, you should think of them as independent concepts. One is sensitive labels meant for orchestrating many policies, and it's meant for protecting your content. Whereas info barrier is all about compliance and regulatory needs. So that's why the segment associating to a site and a user is super critical. Okay, I'm going to take one last question. Let me see whether any new messages. So the question was, any plans to mirror this functionality in MCAS? That's a great feedback. Don't have a specific answer at this point for you, but that's definitely a great feedback. We will take that into consideration. And then I'll finish with one last question. The changing segment and how long does it take to get it effective? So if you change the segment of the user, typically the 24 hours timeline it takes to replicate and update that segment for the given user. So for example, Sesha used to be investment banker, and now you're changing his segment to, let's say, research segment. Then within 24 hours, that segment update will get reflected across all the services. And what it means is right after that, Sesha will no longer, once he is in research segment, and it is effective, he will no longer be able to access the investment banking related sites that he used to be able to access in the past. And this is where the two-layer authorization that I explained really comes into play, and it's a very powerful feature in that regard. Okay, I think I've captured all the questions, Vesa, so I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Sesha. One question: what is MCAS? Just to clarify for those who do not know what it is.
Oh, so. yes, definitely. It's the Microsoft Cloud App Security. It's one of the security broker product, CASB product we call it, Cloud Access Security Broker product that Microsoft sells. Typically, it's used for all the applications in your enterprise, not only just Office 365, but all the applications. If you want to secure them, then MCAS is our product suite that helps you to achieve that.
Excellent. Thanks, Sesha. Luckily, you knew the answer. I was kind of worried. It would have been pretty awkward. So sorry for that.
We work very closely with the team. Yes, we are fully aware of that.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Good. But thank you, Sesha. Thank you, Nikita, for this one. Really great stuff and great capability. As mentioned already numerous times on the discussions, it is an E5 capability, so it's an advanced capability. But I think there will be a lot of customers who are interested on this kind of a security and compliancy features. So it's really great to see these kind of things being available in the Microsoft 365 level. Now, let's just recap the recording. It will be available within 24 hours in a Microsoft 365 SharePoint Community YouTube channel. So this is AKMS M365 PnP videos. From there, you'll find actually the latest, the 14 virtual conference sessions as well, which was the new videos related on many of these things. Actually, Sesha has a video there as well related on security and compliance topics. If you're interested in following up on the extensibility side of the house, it is Microsoft 365 Dev or M365 PnP are the accounts. And obviously, if you're interested on SharePoint, it is an @SharePoint is the account in Twitter. The next SharePoint Framework community call is in July 16th. So on Thursday this week, we have 3 community demos queued up on that one, and that starts at 7 a.m. Pacific time. The next Microsoft 365 General Dev call is on July 23rd, where we talk about for example, Microsoft Teams app templates and extensibility in Microsoft Teams. And then I think we have some other cool demos on that one as well. The next monthly community call is in August 14th, and we have Jax joining us on explaining what is the latest and greatest related on Power Platform and SharePoint and files. So really cool setup coming on the August as well. But thank you everybody for joining. Thank you once again, Sesha and Nikita, for the great presentation, and really nice to see the interest and the questions. So there was a lot of, again, activities happening in the chat. So thank you for that. But that's it from our side. So thank you. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll be definitely in touch. Bye-bye.